Howdy, folks. Welcome to Redneck Gone Green. I'm your host, David Cobb. I am the redneck, and you bet I've gone green, and I'm trying to get you to do it too. And a reminder on this program, when we say go green, we're not merely talking about environmentalism. We're talking about deep ecology. We're talking about a recognition that we are interconnected on this web of life. And whether you come at that from a hard science perspective, or you come at it from a deep eco-spiritualist feminist perspective, or like me, you say those are both completely reasonable ways of understanding the world, I'm going to say it like this. Whatever we do to that web, we are ultimately doing to ourselves, and we know that we are out of balance. We are destroying Mother Earth faster than she can replenish herself, and we're going to have to do something different. Or I like to say, we need to remember what our ancestors knew and what indigenous people still know, and that is that there is a way to be on Mother Earth in balance, in reciprocal right relationship and responsibility. And even rednecks can understand that. And with that, I'm going to bring on my co-host, my fellow redneck. I'm a Texas redneck. Shane's a Mississippi redneck. Shane, how you doing, brother?
Man, David, I'm doing okay. It's been a long, rough weekend, but, happy to be here.
Listen, before we go any further, I got to get you to get up a little bit further. I want to see that T-shirt, and I want you to say what it is.
Yeah, well, we're just launching this as part of the Friends of Democracy at Work initiative. We're creating a lot of merch to help raise awareness of the organizations that have partnered with us, that are actually mobilizing and doing everything from community organizing to land trusts to cooperative building. They are partnering with us, and we are lending our platform to help get the word out about what they're doing. And now we're selling T-shirts to help raise money for them, as well as us, so we can keep doing what we're doing.
And a reminder that here on Redneck Gone Green, hey, y'all, we are friends of Democracy at Work ourselves.
That's right.
And so are you as a viewer, as a listener, if you're listening to the podcast, if you're reading us on Substack, which is just a reminder, y'all, like, comment, subscribe, and share. Redneck Gone Green is an independent program, but it's on the Democracy at Work platform. I got to say, I reckon that Rick Wolf is probably the most famous, most well-known Marxist economist on planet Earth today. And I want to encourage you not only to like, subscribe, and share to what this program is, but there are, like, I don't know how many programs are on at Democracy at Work these days, Shane. Like, that platform is growing.
We are, and it's getting a little difficult to keep up with. But, it all goes down to, we've got a lot of volunteers that are helping out, which makes everything a lot easier. And let's see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We now have 6 shows that we're producing.
That is fantastic.
There's another one in the works. It's probably going to be coming. Well, with any luck, my birthday's in late June. I want to hopefully see that come to fruition by then. So it's going to be an exciting summer.
Well, looky here, y'all. I'm going to say again, like, comment, subscribe, share to the Redneck Gone Green. But remember, this is just one of now 6 programs on the Democracy at Work platform. And if we do this right and y'all help us do it, we're going to create a people's media source to break it down without dumbing it down, to talk about how we can create the world that we want to live in. And on that note, Shane, I'm really excited to bring in the Democracy Collaborative and their movement tracker. So if you've got that queued up, let's play that for the listeners, viewers right now. Folks, go ahead. Hit it.
I was going to say the same thing. Thank you to Mel Figueroa for putting this together for us this week. I know she did it on a short timeline, but she did a great job. I'm going to share this with you right now.
A weekly news roundup of Trump administration actions and movement responses. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man the Trump administration admittedly deported in error, continues to be held in El Salvador CCOT prison despite repeated court orders to facilitate his return to the United States. In a meeting with Trump on Monday, April 14th, Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele said that he would not return Garcia to the United States. Legal observers warn that the Trump administration's open defiance of the courts in this particular case is an expression of obvious contempt for the rule of law, precipitating a constitutional crisis in a very dangerous sense, as it would mean the administration is claiming the power to remove anyone from the United States without due process. Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen traveled to El Salvador to visit Garcia at the prison and confirmed that he is alive and healthy. Harvard University's decision to resist the Trump administration's demands in the face of $2.2 billion in frozen federal funding has galvanized higher education to fight against Trump and the right wing's pressure campaign to remake U.S. universities. Harvard's official response to the Trump administration declared that the university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights. Since Harvard's high-profile pushback, other top schools such as Princeton, Stanford, and MIT have followed suit. April 17th, students, faculty, and workers across 150 campuses participated in demonstrations for a National Day of Action for Higher Education, organized by the Coalition for Action in Higher Ed. That's it for this week's Tracking the Crisis. You can read about these stories and more on our weekly news roundup. Subscribe to our mailing list at trackingthecrisis.org. Back to you, David and Shane.
Awesome.
Woo,
That was
doggy. Man, I tell you what, Mel Figueroa puts together a heck of a 2 minutes, don't she, Shane?
I know. I was like, wait. Okay, yeah, thank you. Great. But I mean, that's how it's going these days. Everything seems to be moving so damn fast. By the time she finished that, it came out today that Harvard just sued Trump this afternoon.
And I'm glad you're there, Shane, because this is the thing that I wanted to say, and I'm going to name it. When I saw Columbia University capitulate and kowtow to Trump, I was devastated because I thought, man, if the Ivy League is not going to stand up and fight with all their resources, and then to their credit, Harvard, which has the single largest endowment of any university in the United States by far, them standing up allowed others to stand up. And it really goes to show, again, like it's not like I kowtow to the university or the academia or to money itself, but there is a role to play for people in positions of power to fight back against Trump. And so I always like to say, I will cheer anytime anybody does the right thing and jeer when they don't. I've never said it before, y'all. I'm giving cheers to Harvard University for standing up and doing the right thing.
Yeah, it's a few words I never thought I'd hear come out of my mouth either. But at the same time, you know, I'm going to play devil's advocate. Like, I love that they did this, but at the same time, it seems like they're forcing the issue of, like Mel mentioned in her clip, about a constitutional crisis. The last time we saw this was Nixon, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was Nixon when he refused to turn over the tapes. And at that time, we had Congress that set up a congressional committee that forced him to do it. And we don't have that today.
In fact, to the contrary, what we have is a Republican MAGA-controlled Congress and, to be blunt, a neoliberal Democratic Party who are floundering and fumbling and engaging in performative pieces of, quote, opposition, which tells me, Shane, it's up to us. Yeah. We, the people, are going to have to show the way going forward to not just how to resist, but also how to build alternatives. And I know. It is with that I am so very excited. Oh, go ahead, Shane.
I got one more bit of information because I wanted to go back and let's not miss the Kilmar Garcia bit either, because that actually this weekend struck home for me. One of my cousin's daughters, her husband, so I don't know, like my third cousin, her husband from Denmark, been married for 12 years, been in the country since 2009. I think I may be wrong. I think he actually runs and owns and operates his own veterinarian clinic. He went on Thursday to get his finalized citizenship paperwork. They arrested him. They detained him and sent him to Louisiana. He's from Denmark. So I found out about this yesterday. My cousin called me. He was like, hey, I haven't spoken to you in like 6 years. How are you? Oh, my husband was just sent to the detention center in Louisiana. Really? Well, I'm pretty sure I know who you guys voted for, but that sucks. That sucks. It's starting to get real.
Well, thank you for that, Shane, and thanks for taking a moment to talk about both of the things on the Tracking the Crisis. And I deeply appreciate you doing that. And to acknowledge, folks, what we're talking about is fascism. We should not this is not merely authoritarianism. What we're seeing is an open defiance to even the petty bourgeoisie democratic controls. What you're seeing is an imperial presidency, and it is horrific. And I am so deeply sorry to hear, Shane, what is happening in your life, and to acknowledge that this is happening to thousands of people.
Yeah.
And this is what I mean when I say only resistance and disruption is ultimately going to pave the way forward. Because yes, we should sue. Yes, we should raise hell on this program and others. But at the end of the day, we need a broad and deep resistance movement in this country.
Yeah, that should include every class of people in this country.
So with that, I am going to bring forward our next guest, Susanna Penfield. Susanna is I'm going to admit it, y'all. She's a personal friend of mine. I had the great privilege of meeting Susanna when colleagues and I were trying to buy Goddard College in Vermont. Susanna is an inheritor of intergenerational wealth who has dedicated her life to disrupting cycles of power from within privilege. She is now helping other people on their own money journeys to figure that out. With that, I'm going to welcome Susanna Penfield to Redneck Gone Green. Hey there.
Hello. Hi, David and Shane. It's so good to be
Hi.
here.
Great to meet you.
Yeah, same.
Susanna, now, again, you and I got to know each other during Goddard College, and that in some respects seemed like ages ago. But the reality is it's only been months, really, maybe just it's less than a year. And in that time, I've really gotten to know you as a human being. I hope it doesn't embarrass you. I'm kind of movement crushing on you because of the clarity of your position, the courage that you talk about money, which most people do not do, and the fact that you've got a program, like how we can use the privilege of inherited wealth to not just give money to poor folk charity wise, but how we can fund transformational change. So with that, Susanna, I'm going to just turn the microphone over to you because I've had the privilege of hearing you do your quote money story. And if it's not too embarrassing to you, would you be willing to share with Redneck Gone Green, Susanna Penfield's quote money story?
Thank you, David. Wow, I'm very flattered, and it goes both ways. I mean, I think movements require all sorts of strategists and folks from different class and life backgrounds. And so often the side with the money is siloed and kept sort of siphoned in a place where we are thought of as the philanthropists, but also there's a deep shame about talking about generational wealth and how money moves through families and how people gain access to it. So yeah, I guess this piece around telling a money story is a practice that is really important to start destigmatizing conversations about money, and to also find connections and points of differences across people's money experiences. So to share mine, I think there are a lot of places that you can start a money story, but I really like to start mine with my grandfather, because the money he left me is what not only I've been able to leverage as a tool for change, but it's also money that I had to fight to gain access to in order to use it for social and systems change. So, but But my grandfather is a human and a beloved figure in my life. We called him Opa. He came from a long lineage of Austrian aristocracy. So there's a lot of embedded class privilege in my family, but there's also a lot of pain, which happens, especially in that generation that was really caught up by World War II. So my grandfather was dislocated from Europe with his mother and 2 siblings who fled to Canada and then were abandoned. His father died as a pilot in the British Royal Air Force, and then the mother left, too traumatized to continue parenting. And thanks to those systems of class privilege, my grandfather was moved to an American relative based in Massachusetts who had the resources to be able to start putting him into private schools that really pushed him up the rungs of New England elitism. So went to boarding schools, went on to Harvard. Speaking of Harvard, I also never thought I would be cheering that university on, but and then he went on to Harvard Business School and then into a career in commercial real estate in Boston, which is where he ended up becoming CEO of a large company that went public and used that money to then not only create an elevated lifestyle for himself. And I don't even mean elevated in the sense of luxurious, but was able to have wealth that then supported what has now been the next 2 generations of our family. So I tell my grandfather's story because I think his upbringing really informs decisions around how he chose to pass down money and how he was working to create security for next generations, because this was something he didn't have and wasn't raised with. And it becomes a really generational story because my mom, as my direct tie to him, was the youngest in her family and also the only daughter. And I named that because gender is also a really important part of how people in my family were and weren't let into financial conversations. So my mom came up in a similar elite Boston space, went to boarding school, but then didn't get into any of the Ivy Leagues that she applied to, that she watched her brothers sort of be funneled into, and started taking departure from that culture. She took a year off, she traveled, she worked at a sheep station, she went to public university in Vermont and met my dad, who had grown up in New Hampshire. And then they settled in a tiny rural town called Stratford, Vermont, which is where I was raised with my 2 younger siblings. And this is kind of where my story begins, because my context was not one of a wealth bubble. It was a tiny rural mixed class town. I had 10 kids in my grade. I had friends whose parents and families fell along the class spectrum. We had multi-generational Vermont farmers to kids whose parents worked at the Ivy League university that was 20 miles away. And I really saw how community came first and how people connected with each other based on a shared sense of place and not just shared income or shared status. My parents did not have high earning jobs. My mom ran a small business for 25 years, and my dad worked in various jobs, but predominantly was a stay-at-home parent and helped coach our youth sports teams. So I saw my wealth as separate. My access to wealth as separate, because I saw my grandparents and their lifestyle and how my cousins went to these same private schools, but I was in public school and was in this town where, we weren't seeing the same level of access to activities, to travel. So my look into that world was through family. And I became really, I think, maybe politicized by that, but in a really personal, intimate way. I went to liberal arts college where I started studying political science and then paired that with feminist and gender studies, because I was seeing how these narratives of need and humanitarianism were really skewed by identity and by whiteness and by masculinity, and how we have to start thinking a little bit more critically about how we're talking about who needs what and where what should go. And I graduated college. I took an AmeriCorps job. I was working in community economic development. And it was that same year, I was age 23, when I received an email from a investment firm, and there was a link to an account that had my name on it. And I clicked on this link, and there was an investment portfolio that was worth $1 million. with my name right at the top. And I was overwhelmed. I felt that this money suddenly put me in direct contradiction to the communities I was part of, what I had studied, my activism, the activist identity I was claiming, and it made me really complicit suddenly in this widening wealth gap that I had been advocating against and studying to understand my role in defeating. And this was the first time I really experienced guilt around money and this feeling of dissonance between who I thought I was and then what I had access to. But I also think of this moment as a huge trajectory shift, because my first thought was, well, I'm working in places that have a gap in resources, and suddenly it looks like I have resources. So how can I bridge this? How can I redistribute this wealth and start to understand that this money and my role as someone who has existed in places of privilege could be actually a part of my activism and not something I had to hide from these activist communities. So I started redistributing, and I gave away $100,000 that first year, which was 10% of the assets in this account. And as I was redistributing, I was going deeper also into the investments that were in this portfolio and realizing there was this deep irony between how the money was invested, which was in public markets. So in these corporations that profit off extracting from people and from planet. And then I'm giving away 10% to these grassroots movements that are only sort of kept in that cycle by the companies that my portfolio profits off of. So then I had this other awakening around, okay, well, I need to shift my investments so that there can be this balance between what I'm giving, how it's living, where the money is living, and the social, climate, economic change that I want to be part of. So that is sort of my origin story around how I then fell into this personal work of just self-educating around finance and how extractive finance can become regenerative. And there's a whole next chapter of this story, which is that the money I inherited was held in a trust fund, which is not just an investment account. It is actually a legal vehicle where a trustee is put in place to protect the money in the trust and continue to keep it growing. So not only did I have to self-educate around investments, around giving, how to be someone who shows up in relationship to movements, is not dictating change, but is just collectively participating in it. But I also had to legally educate myself, because I started to propose all these plans to the trust company around how I wanted to invest, how much I wanted to be giving, spending down the money in this account. And I started to be rejected, even though it was my name that was on this account. And this experience really, to me, became a microcosm of what some other organizers and activists, Chuck Collins in particular, have called the wealth defense industry, which is all of the different professionals, financial advisors, accountants, lawyers, who are really conditioned to protect inherited wealth, protect assets, and prioritize financial profit above all else, above extraction of planet, exploitation of people. And this is not even really to make those people the villain. It's just the story of that industry. And it took a lot to liberate that money and those assets. And ultimately what it took was actually organizing my family, my mom and my younger siblings and my grandmother, to join me in this effort to get that money out of their hands and into a place where we could actually make decisions for ourselves about how this money could live in alignment with our values and start to move back into community. So again, I'm not going to go into that saga, but it did happen. We dissolved this money. We are now on our personal journeys to redistribute and reinvest. And I also now help other people do that work. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it there, because that was a longer version of my money story than I usually tell.
No, I'm so glad that you took that time, and I want to lift up, Susanna, the courage and the candor it takes to have honest conversation about money and about big old piles of it. Because I am I'm gonna say this straight up, y'all. There is not such a thing as a big old huge pile of money that is not drenched in blood and sweat and oppression, right? There, like, you just cannot accumulate millions and billions of dollars that is not directly extractive, is directly out of genocide, directly out of the enslavement, directly out of class exploitation, right? And I just want to point out, for those of you who are watching live, you're watching Susanna Penfield nod her head yes enthusiastically to that statement. And we're also taught not to talk about it. And the other thing that I want to say is a phrase that my daddy said one time that always stuck with me. He said, "Son, money is a lot like cow manure. If you pile it up in one spot, it smells like the shit that it is. But if you spread it around a farm, you can do a whole lot of good with it." And isn't that something, Susanna?
No, I love that. I'm going to use that.
That's so much. That's so much more than anybody in my family ever talked to me about money. I couldn't get over it.
And y'all, what I'm getting at here is that for somebody like Susanna Penfield to come publicly and say, "This is my money story, and I inherited $1 million unbeknownst to me," and then having to figure out that and learn. And I'll be honest, before I got to know you and others, I didn't realize that this wealth defense industry existed, right? I knew about Chuck Collins from the global justice days, and I thought that he inherited a bunch of money and just started giving it away. I had no idea how difficult it was, actually. Like, you can give away chunks of it, but what's known under law as the corpus, right? Like, I reckon, Susanna, that what you were allowed to do is give away bits of it, but you could not actually get to the corpus. So I'm going to invite you to explain what that process is and what do we mean by that?
Yeah. It's so creepy, all this terminology, because it literally is like this zombie. Like, it's this corpus of money that moves between generations and is untouched, is restricted from being accessed. And so what happens with a trust fund? So a trust is really a legal vehicle that can be used for money, for land. You've probably heard of land trusts, community trusts, assets. A trust fund is that trope of a trust fund baby. So someone whose parent or grandparent or however many generations back puts money into a place where it then moves out of the control of the grantor, who is the person who put that money in trust, but it is not given entirely to the beneficiary. So in that case, I was the beneficiary, my grandfather's the grantor, and all decision-making power goes to the trustee, whoever that is assigned to be. And so the whole function of a trust is to remove control from the beneficiary and hand it over to this third-party entity. So in my case, the trustee was the trust company, which is a large for-profit corporation. And so, yes, the corpus is the money that itself is invested. And then there's the returns, the profit that is being generated off those investments. And so when I started to give, they started to tell me that the level at which I wanted to give, $100,000 a year, increasing upwards over the next couple of years, would start to cut into that corpus, which meant that this trust was no longer growing. It was actually shrinking. And they were legally bound to make sure that my trust, this corpus, did not shrink. And that was the grounds on which they halted my redistribution plan. They halted my reinvestment plan, which had me moving assets out of public stocks and into community loan funds and regenerative agriculture funds and cooperative funds in New England, where I grew up. And
so I'm going to stop you for just a moment, because I want people to understand what I have come to learn and what you just said. Because when I was first told that, it didn't make any damn sense to me. Wait a minute, you inherited this money, but you're not allowed to actually control the money. So folks, this is what the quote wealth defense industry is about. And I can tell you, Susanna Penfield is telling the truth. That when you are, again, that trope of a trust fund baby, unless you really work your butt off and educate yourself with the tools, you literally are not allowed to actually just give all of the money away. You're not
Correct.
legally allowed to do that under trust law.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's particularly relevant right now because there's this huge intergenerational transfer happening where there's like $80 trillion moving from boomers to millennials or Gen Z, but it's not going directly to individuals. In most cases, it's going to trust, which means that it is continuing to sort of be in the grasp of the wealth defense industry. And it prevents that money from actually moving into, it prevents the manure from being spread. It's
Yeah,
leaving it in
there
that
you
pile.
go. They're just sitting on a big pile of stink.
Exactly.
And I do also want to circle back and really talk about the gendered access or nature of this money, both your own experience, but also the research that you were doing, because before you realized that you were an inheritor like that, there was something really like, I just want you to tell your story that is not, because you're not just your money story, right?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I want you to now go back and thread that in your own work around gender as both a social change agent and a budding public intellectual. Like, I think that there is something worth exploring here.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Gender played a huge role, which I mentioned earlier, and I think I watched play out very acutely in my family as I discovered this money and I started to make decisions around how to move it, how I wanted to be redistributing. And I saw the different reactions that that statement was having. And I started to see that there was much more of a pull to this idea of giving and redistribution from women in my family, those who had been socialized as women. This was my mom, who was the only girl in her family, and my grandmother, who were the ones who pretty quickly wanted to listen and decided that this felt like a continuation of work they had already been doing as philanthropists and community members for a really long time. Meanwhile, I was seeing some of the men in my family, again, to no fault of their own other than socialization, say, this doesn't feel like a responsibility of ours. This feels like money that was earned and we are entitled to. And not only was this happening in my family, but I was seeing this like broadly across society, where a lot of the groups that I was becoming part of young people who had class or wealth privilege and wanted to show up for social justice were mostly femme identifying women and people socialized as women to think about their role and wanting to give back and think about the collective. And it happened at this moment where I happened to be in a master's program, going deeper into my gender studies. And I was thinking about my own experience of guilt, which I named earlier, which was this first emotion that surfaced when I was presented with this $1 million account. And I thought, what does it mean that I, as a woman, feel more guilty than particularly those that have masculinity backing them? So I started doing this deep dive, and the first thing I discovered was that there's a difference between guilt and shame. And shame is a really internal emotion. It is a negative view of yourself, whereas guilt is external, and it's a negative view about how others are impacted. So shame becomes this identity, and it thrives in secrecy and silence, and it becomes very self-punishing. Whereas guilt is momentary because you tell yourself, wait, this is not me. I am not bad, but maybe there is something bad about what I did or what I have received, and I can do something differently. It is a call to action to change that. And so guilt.
Can I just interrupt long enough? Because I'm a mama's boy, and I reference my mama all the time. And my mama taught me this, Susanna, without academic research behind it. But she used to say, son, shame and guilt, these are useless emotions unless it guides future conduct. And what she said is, if you are ever feeling guilty about anything in your life, here's the solution. Start doing something differently or stop doing something that you're doing. And
Exactly.
that really landed for me, because I don't think that we don't learn from shame and blame, and we're not going to get to the world I want to live in if anybody has to feel shamed. Like, instead, let's heal each other. And this conversation that you're having, honestly, to me, is an invitation to get over just my own class resentment, which I carry, and say, oh, snap. There are people like Susanna Penfield of the world that are like good humans that I can throw down with, and we can deconstruct this thing and create a new world. So I'm not blowing sunshine up your ass, Susanna, when I say, sorry, I didn't mean that well, welcome to the Redneck.
Yeah.
This is the Redneck part of the Redneck Gone Green show. But I'm just saying, I'm not being sycophantic with you when I say getting to meet you and others like you have convinced me that there are people like, and I saw another writer on Substack who pointed out that there is a place in the rebellion for people of wealth.
Yeah.
And it's not just give away your money. It's like, no, bring all of yourself into this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up so many good points in the telling of your story, Susanna. And I when you spoke about gender and finance, thinking about my own upbringing and how it's not talked about very much, especially in the South, but specifically, my mother had no concept of finance. My father and her never spoke about it. They didn't really talk to me about it. Everything I learned, I had to do it on my own. And I know too that where I grew up, and I grew up the son of a preacher, so we weren't exactly, wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. But at the same time, the people that I grew up around seemed to have, and I know David shares this sentiment with the idea of sort of minimizing the wealth class, right? And that ideology, I mean, I've even seen it a couple times in the comments about, sort of ostracizing them, like people that, especially generational wealth. It's like, oh, you didn't do anything. You just got it handed to you, and they're pissed off about it. And I'm so happy that we're able to have this dialogue about what the struggles are, especially when it comes to shame and guilt, because it reminds me of like, there's sort of like a knee-jerk reaction that's almost reminds me of like alcoholism or addiction. And then I see that parlaying into developing a further sense of greed in people, and then you see them ostracize themselves from their own community members even further, and then that you seemed to be able to, you stop that, you squelch that, and to see that as a living example is fucking fantastic. I really am grateful that you're doing what you're doing and coming on the show about it.
Thank you. And you're like exactly on it in terms of this collective stake. Like, rich people also suffer when they hoard wealth because you cut yourself off, you isolate, and you don't have to rely on other people or be vulnerable because you can just use your money as a way to maintain separation. And so breaking that back down and returning to community is part of redistributing. And it's not to deprive yourself. It's actually to bring more joy and bring more connection through just being more vulnerable.
Yeah, I think it's to be fair, I don't think I've ever heard the phrase wealth defense industry until today. Maybe I just didn't pay attention to it, or, my brain turns off when I hear the word wealth. But the idea that exists, and it's like, so let me get this straight. We have essentially a ruling class that perpetuates societal education towards those who are impoverished to minimize the wealth, right? But at the same time, we're not going to let you touch your wealth. So they're creating and perpetuating a whole cycle of like love, hate, sort of, and adoration at the same time. It's like, oh, you want to be like this billionaire, but you're never going to be. Right. It's so fucked up.
So worshiping money, which is ridiculous because money is meant to be of service. And when it is siphoned off and used as this symbol, then it really doesn't benefit anyone, even the person who's maybe their status benefits, but again, only to a certain tier. Because again, of all the stories are eat the rich, like this is a common narrative that we have. And you're right, I think it makes people feel isolated instead of invited in and then able to start letting that money be of service.
Susanna, we have a longtime viewer, listener, Patricia, who I thought made a profoundly important comment. And I want to lift it up, put it on the lower third, read it out loud, and then invite you to respond to it. Patricia writes, if we do get to a fully democratized society, there can be no wealth. I'm going to encourage you to react to that, and then I will.
Yeah, I love that comment. It represents, I think, where I'm at now in this journey, which is moving from a place of individual action and individual redistribution to a place of collective action and thinking about how it should not and cannot only fall on the hope that people with excess wealth and resources will decide to redistribute, but we actually need policy in place, and we need to implement structures that will facilitate the movement of wealth out of those hoarded pockets and back into community. And so this means this is taxation. This is what that system was created to do. And also can disrupt the whole philanthropic power dynamic where rich people get to decide what is worth funding and how much to fund and where and what it can be used for. And so recently, actually, my mom and I and some other members of my family publicly signed a call to tax the wealthy in Vermont, which is the state that we're from, which was a huge risk because, again, coming out as those who have benefited from this really extractive system, especially in this small town where we grow up and my parents still live, can feel really vulnerable because it does place you in some ways in opposition to the community identity you've created. But also it felt so important to us that this work become collective and be something that is not left up to rich people to determine. So I also think, I guess, to Patricia's point, that wealth does not have to be thought of as solely financial. So I would hope that it's not that there's no wealth, it's that everyone has wealth, and wealth exists in a spectrum of ways where you have time wealth, you have physical wealth, you have social relational wealth, and that is shared and not something that is only given to those who are born into it.
And that's exactly what I wanted to get into, because folks who know me, and I am no longer ashamed to talk about it this way, y'all. But like, I grew up in poverty, not working class, but I know what it's like as a 7-8-year-old boy. One of my jobs, me and my brother, we literally had to carry a 5-gallon bucket of our family's excrement and carry it to the back of the property and pour it into a hole in the ground. Like, that was our job. And I used to be so deeply ashamed to tell that. And as a little boy, I was so resentful of my mama and my daddy. Like, why do we live like this? Like, it's all your fault. And I like to joke, Susanna, luckily for me, 2 things happened: Marxism and therapy. And you know, what it helped me to understand was they are systems in place. And I'm with you. I don't want there to be any hoarding of money and financing. But I also have to say, y'all, I grew up super wealthy in the sense that my mama and papa who raised me, and my mama, I was, as they say, born out of wedlock. But y'all, I was bombarded with love as a little baby. Like, the first 6 to 7 years of my life was absolutely trauma-free. Like, I look back on it and I realize, especially because I reckon that mama, papa, mama knew that there would be some people trying to make me feel a certain kind of way about being, quote, born out of wedlock, right? That they made it they made it crystal clear to me as a baby that I was loved, that I was wanted, that there was a place in the world for me. I like to say I was pampered, but not spoiled. So I got loving discipline and I still remember being taught I had gifts, and they encouraged me to bring my gifts and to share it with others. You know what else, Shane and Susanna, they taught me? Other people have gifts too. And it's such a pleasure and a treat to create circumstances that other people get to share their gifts as well. I'm getting teary-eyed remembering Mama and Papa and how loved I was. I didn't know we were, quote, poor. I thought the world was a fantastic place because I could not have imagined a wealthier emotional situation for a baby that I got to experience. So what I'm going to say is every human child deserves that emotional part that I've just described, and every human child deserves enough food, like shelter. There's enough to go around. All we have to do is share. This ain't rocket science.
Yes, that's it.
But that too should be shared.
Also true.
So look at here. I am loving this level of conversation. I want to shift a little more concretely into your work with the, quote, chosen family office, because I was kind of astounded to learn that there are things called family offices for financial planning. And Susanna, I'm going to invite you to educate me and this audience. What the heck is a family office, and what makes the chosen family office so unique?
Yeah. So a family office is a concept that is part in many ways of the wealth defense industry. And it is something that high net wealth families will create to have all of their financial services and wealth management professionals in-house. So personally hired to facilitate, manage, protect wealth. So there will be a family office for the Rockefellers that has, the personal attorney, the financial advisors, the accountants. And this really simplifies that process of wealth management because you don't have to go all over the place picking these different professionals. They work for you. So this has been used as a way to not only ease the process, but also to keep it secretive. And unfortunately, in a misuse of those tools to do things to evade taxes and to continue accumulating wealth in ways that are not justice oriented, and it all gets kept hidden by a family office. So we wanted to reappropriate that term and take the piece of it that we appreciated, which was this idea of family and ease of professionals and practitioners who are all working towards a shared goal and communicating with each other. But we wanted to queer it up is a way of saying it. So chosen family being a practice of not just being tied to your family of origin, your biological family, but your community members, your friends, the people you want to bring into your family system. So we're trying to say that wealth and managing and redistributing and stewarding wealth can be a practice that people can do together. And what we do at Chosen Family Office is we work with individuals and family or chosen family units who are ready to start thinking more holistically about their wealth, are ready to start redistributing their money that they have determined to be excess of what they need, but also to reinvest in places that are not extractive, are aligned with their values. And then we will pair those folks with radical financial advisors that exist, people who have come up through activist spaces or have decided to use the tool of financial advising to help shift more money flowing to grassroots movements. So it's a lot of people like me who came into inherited wealth, realized that they could use that as a tool for change, and then need support to do it. They need the people who have the credentials, have the tools. And so we meet people at the beginning of that journey and then pair them with these money teams that we create to facilitate this flow of resources.
Again, Susanna, I have learned so much about this world because what I have always like one thing that I know is that I am anti-capitalism, right? I'm not anti-capital. Karl Marx wrote a pretty important book called Das Kapital, right? Like I'm just pointing out that what you're describing has really sort of changed how, and I'm being really sincere when I say, in the last, say, 3 to 5 years, I've really begun to change how I think about capital. I'm still a Marxist, but now that I have helped to develop affordable housing units, I've become a Marxist developer, right? And because you still got to get stuff to pencil out. And I'm not trying to be sycophantic, Susanna, but after meeting you and people like you, I am now becoming a Marxist financier. And I don't think that those are necessarily, contradictions, which brings me to another comment in the chat that I want to really lift up. And I want to invite you to react to it. And that is a profound question. I guess that's Brooklyn Robbie, but I'm not sure. But I'll just say, are there any really, quote, good billionaires? That phrase used recently by the chair of the Democratic National Committee. Like I did before, Susanna, I'm going to give you an opportunity to react and reflect on that question. Then Shane and I are going to chop it up.
I mean, no. I think to get to that level of wealth, to the point about the manure pile, like there has just been a continued level of extraction and dismissal of that extraction to a point where there are multiple decision points before one becomes a billionaire. That money could be diverted, could be given, could be put in different places, and those choices and those decisions have not been made. So I think that is my answer. I think the nuance can be my dissertation research, actually, which was on guilt and shame. My case study was on Mackenzie Scott. So Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, who gained access to his billions of dollars through their divorce settlement and has now kind of, quote unquote, upended the philanthropic world by going against all these typical philanthropy practices. So like, she doesn't require applications. She doesn't require feedback reports from the places where she's giving and granting money. It's called no strings attached giving. She has a committee of people who decide where it's going. She's giving at a faster rate than any of the men at that tier of wealth. So there is practices in place where, again, this piece around socialization and of desire to take care of collective and realizing you can still meet your needs and be hugely generous is something that is happening. And I think there are people who, through privileges of their own, like Mackenzie Scott, find themselves to be billionaires, but then there's a whole nother set of decisions. And I see her making a lot of those. So that gives me hope. But yeah, to go back to it, no one should have that much money.
And thank you. I know I kind of sort of put you on the spot, but really what I knew I was doing was setting you up, Susanna, because again, I know you and I knew that the answer would be, of course, there's no such thing as a good billionaire. But I want to be clear. I reckon that just as I've discovered that there are good people who are millionaires, there are probably good humans who are billionaires who need a way out. And like, I'm not trying to I'm trying to be real here, y'all. I invite all of us to rethink our relationship to money itself and to stop treating it like such a scarcity as I did growing up, and to start to lean into how can we imagine the world that we want to live in, and how can we start to meet our own needs? How can we build new alternatives? And that is not to say that we can just wish our way into it, but it is to say, how do we build the world that we want now? And I think this is the reason that the People's Network for Land and Liberation, we are now going into and partnering, Susanna, with you and others like you to create a new type of, quote, impact investment fund, where we're not merely talking about market rate returns, but we're actually talking about how can we do genuinely catalytic investments that can pay back maybe only 75% of the money. So you end up giving away 25%, but you get paid some other back, to take the present value of money, the way economists talk about it, and we leverage it. Or maybe we borrow 100 grand and pay you back 100 grand, but with 0%, but we get a chance to use that money to build an affordable housing project. The point is, Susanna, I think that there is a way to begin to upend not only the wealth defense industry, but the idea of impact investing itself. And again, your work and meeting you through resource generation and the Goddard College experience was part of that journey for me. And in the closing moments, I do want to give you a chance to talk about the work at resource generation and how that has been influential in your work.
Yeah, resource generation is a pretty unique space. It is a national organization that organizes and is community to young people ages 18 to 35 who have access to wealth and class privilege in the United States and want to work towards equitable redistribution of wealth, of land, of power, and is not only a community of practice for facilitating this movement of resources from a place where they're held to the places where they're needed, but it also really is a really beautiful space of transparency to start breaking that stigma that is, to circle back, having conversations about money, getting familiar with your own money story, getting comfortable talking about your money story and bringing it up in different environments with different people, and how as young people, we're uniquely positioned at a pivotal life stage to really start that practice early and make these commitments to social movement and to be in solidarity with social movement, to be part of it, and not as funders, but as participants in the movement itself that can show up with our money as well as our thoughts and our time and our energy. So resource generation is the group that partnered with David and the Goddard College campaign to think about all these different skills and how our network could really be beneficial to each other. Also, because individual funders are much more nimble than private foundations and federal funding and granting. And so we're able to move money faster and show up in really important ways that others can't. And that is being stripped from us right now. So,
and I got to say, Susanna, one thing that I have learned, and that is the movement can raise money, and we can raise a lot of money, but we can't raise money at the speed of commercial real estate. And that has been proven time and time again, which is why for me and you, Susanna, and others in this world are trying to figure out how can we build instruments and mechanisms to be able to fund projects that go beyond just philanthropy, right? And because this is the thing, like, obviously I solicit money. I try to raise money, small donor money. I try to raise, institutional philanthropy. But at the end of the day, I really want to create systems and structures where we go beyond that and where we don't actually, like, I really want to live in a world where everybody's needs are met, period, full stop, where housing, healthcare, food, art, and culture are rights that we have a society in which those are just simply part of the social construct. But we're not there yet. So what is that? In the Marxist terminology, we'd call it, what's the transitional program? How do we actually create systems to do that in the here and now? And so to me, Susanna, you're giving me hope that we can create that together and that we can get access to the kinds of capital that could make capitalism obsolete. Because I don't want to just coexist with capitalism. I want to replace capitalism.
Yeah. I mean, I would just say, I think personal change and structural change are deeply connected. And so it really is that work of getting familiar with your values and how you can meet those values in community, how money is part of it, how it isn't, but like getting in right relationship with how you want to show up for the people that you care about, and then getting familiar with your money story as well as a part of that tool for change. But it really is about being in community and being able to be vulnerable.
Well, looky here. The time has just flown by, Susanna, but I do want to give you an opportunity for any closing thoughts, anything that you want to share with the listeners and viewers of Redneck Gone Green.
think I just did it. I think it's ask yourself the questions, look deep. I mean, the money story, but it's so much more than a money story. It's money surfaces so many things that are in the dynamics that we have with the people in our lives, with the places in our lives, with the way that we were brought up, and looking closely at that can really help you clarify what is important to you. So I think I just encourage people to have those conversations and be curious with themselves and with each other.
Well, I want to thank you, Susanna Penfield of the Chosen Family Office, for joining us here on Redneck Gone Green. Thank you so much. Shane, stick around for some closing thoughts with me, would you, brother?
Absolutely.
All right. So bye, Susanna. Thanks so much. Y'all, I do want to, with Shane, I'm of a certain generation, right? And Jimi Hendrix, not only was he an amazing guitarist, but he had a quote that I love. And he said, "When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace." And for me, that conversation with Susanna Penfield really landed. Like, how do we think about integrating this? And I have to get over my class resentment and anger and really think about, oh, snap, there are people that are good folk that I could work with.
Yeah, that have money. Yeah.
It's a crazy thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's something that I grew up rejecting and being quite confused about. And I like I said earlier, I'm so glad that Susanna was able to come on and share her story with our audience, and then to me specifically too, because I gleaned a lot and learned a lot, especially going back to the whole shame and guilt piece of it. There's so many different aspects of it, and I think you hit the nail on the head. You used one key word that I'm going to take away from today's discussion: curiosity, right? And Susanna even echoed the sentiment, is to remain curious about what's possible when there is community.
Well, looky here, y'all. I just want to take this opportunity as we close out to say, again, thank you to Susanna Penfield. Thank you to Chris, who is behind the scenes. Thank you to Shane Knight, who's the co-host here. But really, y'all, I want to thank you, the viewer, the listener, the reader of Redneck Gone Green. This community is slowly building, but we are, in fact, building. And we are having the kind of conversation that I think is desperately needed in order to not just fight back, not just resist, but to build alternatives. So I'll close again with a request. Please like, please comment, please share this conversation with others. Let's build this network. Let's build together, and let's build a world where there are no billionaires. And let's build a world where there are no hungry children. There are no homeless people. We can build that world, and we can do it together. Peace, y'all.